Welcome to the 2025 International Women's Day Leadership Panel and Celebration. My name is Sarah Ernschwinder, and I am just thrilled to welcome all of you here today. I was getting chills seeing how many folks were joining us, and a huge shout out to the group that we have joining from ADV, and all of you. Just want to give you a congratulations for prioritizing this conversation today. Just a couple of logistics. We welcome you to introduce yourselves and connect in the chat. I think one of the beautiful things about this event is just as much as we learn from the panelists, seeing the community that is created in the chat is very welcome. So we certainly encourage you to do that. Lots of folks have asked if we'll be recording the session. We will, and that'll be sent out in an email in the next couple of days. And then we'll have Q&A at the end, so feel free to drop questions in the Q&A function as we go. For those of you who have been friends of Tier 1 for a long time, thank you for being here today. For those of you who are new to our community, we welcome you. Here at Tier 1, we help organizations transform by design, whether that's from the strategy through the activation. We can provide that end-to-end transformation partnership that provides intuitive, connected solutions that topple silos, build culture, and elevate people, intentionally driving impact and accelerating results. A big part of that work is removing barriers for people to do their best work. And that's why it's so important for us to prioritize this conversation. With that, at Tier 1, we are a Tier 1 Performance, we are a woman-led organization. So I am honored to turn over the mic to our president and COO, Katie Fry.
Thank you so much, Sarah, and it's a pleasure to be seeing everyone introduce themselves in the chat. As Sarah said, much gratitude for you making the choice to join us. There's always a myriad of other places and things that you can be doing, so very grateful that you chose to spend this time for us. And I like to think about this day that it doesn't matter the weather, because it is a BYOS kind of day. You're going to bring your own sunshine, and if that's especially true for International Women's Day. I wanted to spend just a couple of moments sharing a little bit about the theme and how we're going to orient the conversation today. So this year's theme for IWD is Accelerate Action. And that's a call to not only celebrate the achievements of women, but also a powerful call to move beyond conversation and drive real, tangible progress toward gender equality. It challenges us, each of us, to break barriers, push potentially for policy changes, and create opportunities that empower women in every sphere, so our workplaces, our communities, and beyond. And when we look at the latest data, it's also clear that progress is happening far too slowly. For example, at our current pace, it could take nearly 50 years to achieve true gender parity in corporate America. I don't know about you, but that feels unacceptable, especially considering the pace at which other things are changing in our world today. So today, we're here to challenge that narrative, push on that data, and hopefully shorten that timeline. I'm a bit of a quote collector and wanted to share one that resonates with me and I believe embodies the spirit of Accelerate Action, which is, do not wait for someone else to come and speak for you. It's you who can change the world, by Mulala Yousafzai. This quote is a powerful reminder that action starts with us. Our voices, our choices, and our willingness to push for change. Accelerate Action means taking immediate innovative steps to create more inclusive workplaces. So I'm eager for us to use today's discussion as a spark to inspire real, rapid progress toward gender equity. And I couldn't think of a better group to be starting that discussion with, and wanted to take a moment to ask each one of our amazing panelists to take a couple of minutes to just introduce themselves to us so we have a little bit of perspective on who they are. And I'm going to start with Danielle.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much, Katie and Tier 1 team for inviting me to be part of this conversation. I'm Danielle, Harris Thompson. I work at the Cow Corporation. I recognize most people have never heard of Cow, may not be familiar. Hopefully you know our brands like Jergens, Biore, John Frieda, and Curel. And at Cal, I lead organizational change management for Americas and EMEA as part of our IT organization. And I think you an accomplishment, is that what you said?
Yeah, please. We should celebrate. So let us help do that.
Well, if you don't mind me going outside of work for just an achievement, I think in this season of life, if you ask me 15 years, it would be a little bit different. But right now in this season of life, it's just raising 2 boys to be good humans. So my husband and I are really just working to raise boys who become men, who are compassionate, open-minded supporters of others. And I think if we can do that, that will be my biggest accomplishment. So that's what I'm working toward every day.
And they will change the world, no doubt, Danielle. Thank you. Dr. Consuela Wilson, who we will fondly refer to as Dr. C for our conversation today.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me a part of this discussion. My name is Consuela Wilson. My background is in workforce transformations. Particularly, I work with a lot of capital investment portfolio companies with acquisitions and mergers and helping to build a talent culture and community best practices as it relates to career navigation and mobility. I've spent the last 8 years at Delta Airlines, also in workforce transformation and global talent management, where I lead talent enablement for the enterprise, which is upskilling, reskilling, and getting people ready for the roles of the future, particularly leading our digital transformation.
Thank you. And Becky.
Hi, I'm Becky Blank. I am the CEO of Ample, a digital marketing agency based in Cincinnati, Ohio. My background is largely in technology and operations. I always say I'm a technologist first and an operations person second. And I've been around the gamut of different web development agencies and digital marketing agencies in Cincinnati for the majority of my career. I've been with Ample for the last 10 years. I started as a project manager and kind of inched my way up the chain. So I've been the CEO for the last 2.5 years.
Thank you, Becky. And I'll share with all of you, whether you're newer to starting your career, navigating new challenges, or fully leading the way at this point, today is about sharing our stories, exchanging hopefully some wisdom as part of that, and celebrating the power of women's voices. And as we begin this conversation with this panel of inspiring women leaders, I'm inviting each of you to reflect on how each one of us can drive change, both through our personal stories and our professional experiences. And so for the panel discussion, I'm excited for us to dive in. We'll explore how we can collectively accelerate action for a more inclusive future. And the panelists and I have talked about a few topics, so I will tee up the topic and then invite our panelists to share their thoughts. And the first one, we're just going to start with the theme itself, accelerate action. And if I could ask each of you to please share a personal story of a time when you or a leader you admire took bold action to advance equity for women in the workplace. And if you would also share the impact that action had on you and those around you. I'm going to start with you, Danielle.
Awesome. I love this question that you give us a chance to spotlight someone else. And there are a few I'd like to talk about, but the first one that came to mind is a childhood friend of mine named Anitra Hamilton, who is a registered nurse in Morgantown, West Virginia. And during her time as a nurse, one of the things that has stood out to Anitra is recognizing the disparity in maternal health for Black women across the state. And it's not unique to West Virginia, as nationally, I think Black women face pretty significant disparities in maternal health and higher rates of mortality and morbidity. And so seeing this led Anitra to get more involved with the local chapter of the NAACP and create a coalition of like-minded groups and organizations. And together they started thinking about legislation that they could introduce to lawmakers to really start to address this issue. And as she worked on this, she started to move further into the lawmaking side of the states and went a step further to get appointed to the West Virginia House of Delegates. She is the only Black woman in the House, but she's very passionate about this mission and has worked across the organization to build allies, to get people involved with this cause and this mission. And she's been working in the House of Delegates for a couple of years now. And last year, West Virginia passed legislation to address infant mortality and maternal mortality across the state. And I was just so proud of the work that she's doing and that she continues to do. And she's doing all of this while still serving as a nurse in the hospital there. And so I know that she will continue to be a champion for women and for children across the state. She just started her second term in the House of Delegates. So I'm just tremendously proud of Delegate Anitra Hamilton for turning what she saw as a need into action that's really serving all women across the state in a meaningful way.
That's amazing. Thank you, Danielle. Dr. C, how about you?
Yeah, thank you. So I'm going to be vulnerable for a moment to share a little bit about my career journey and the impact of a person in my life. I think I introduced myself. I worked in predominantly male dominant worlds for most of my career, technology, capital investment. So in many of those situations, I was the only person of color in the room and at the table. I was also the only female in many of those executive leadership meetings and forums. And I worked for an organization that was a smaller organization, part of a larger portfolio. I worked there for 8 years, 6 of those years, and I worked as the HR director at the time. 6 of those years, we went through an acquisition. So we acquired various companies. I took the company from about 250 when I started to over 5,000, and we were global within that 6-year time frame. And so tremendous growth. And my role as the most senior HR person in the company was to create all of the talent strategy. I also led total reward, so that included payroll and benefits. So I had a significant role in this organization. And when it came time to do the 7th acquisition, the company CEO, whom I reported to, told me that they were going to now bring in someone else who was going to take the company to the next level. And I was obviously very devastated, considering what I had gone through and demonstrated in terms of performance, to be able to successfully navigate 6 prior acquisitions, to now hear that there's going to be someone coming in that would take the company to the next level, as if I was not enough. And so I resigned that role and moved on as a result of being approached by another individual who was a CEO of another company, who had followed the progress of the company that I'd come from. And he was looking for someone in an HR capacity to help take that company to the next level. And so that individual was a gentleman by the name of Ron Self, who became my leader, my CEO, and also my mentor over the last 20 plus years now. And Ron believed in me. He healed all the wounds that I had at the time from feeling that I wasn't enough, and that I lost confidence in myself as a professional woman in business in a male dominant role. Or a male-dominant industry. And Ron really helped me to build back up that confidence level. And today we still have an endearing relationship as a mentor to me.
Thank you for sharing that. And you mentioned kind of the vulnerability piece to it. And it goes without saying, like, each one of you is going to do a bit of that for us today. So gratitude for the willingness to, because it allows all of us to relate to your lived experience, as well as to feel seen for some of our relatable experiences. So thank you. And Becky.
Okay, I'm going to stay on this vulnerability theme. Thank you for inspiring me, Dr. C, because my story is a little bit, it's hard. Content warning, like this is a sexual harassment story. So so at one of my jobs, I was the only woman on the tech team, and I think I was one of 3 people of color on the team, and it was like a tech team of like 20-ish people, right? And one day, one of my colleagues sends out an email with the subject line that just says IWBWFHT, like this acronym. And he's like being kind of silly about it. And he's like, if anybody can guess what that stands for, let me know. You win a fabulous prize, something to that effect. And so like all day long, people are like being goofy and sending back, silly responses to that. And so I'm in a meeting that afternoon with my boss and 2 of my peers on the team. And I noticed that like all the guys and the other 3 that were in this meeting, they're all men. And I noticed that their cell phones are on the table and they start buzzing simultaneously. And, my boss picks up his phone and he looks at it and he starts like chuckling to himself. And at the moment, like I was presenting something. And so I was like, anything you want to share with the class? Like what's going on? Should I stop? Because it was clear that like they had all received the same message. Well, what it was a text message from one of my other colleagues on this team. He had sent it to all the men on the team, and it said, IWBWFHT, I wish Becky would flash her tits. And it was a really awkward, horrible moment for me. I didn't know what to do in that moment, right? I just kind of like was like, ha, 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 okay, that's funny. And then later that afternoon, I emailed my boss. And by the way, like it was my boss that read it out loud to me. Like he made the poor choice to like read this to me in front of my colleagues. And so I emailed him later that afternoon and I was like, hey, that wasn't cool. Like I didn't appreciate that. And it just, it made me feel some kind of way and no, thank you. And he responded back to my email and it was basically the equivalent of like a slug on the shoulder. And he was like, well, you're one of the guys, like, you're one of the guys, like, don't worry about it. And I was just like, okay. So this was about a little over 10 years ago, maybe 10, 12 years ago. And this was a moment in the tech space, like in the tech industry, where when women were reporting violations like that to HR, we were being victimized. Like you were just cast out as a victim. Like it was bad enough that you were sort of a lonely, only woman on a team, but like if you then reported yourself or like reported transgressions against you, then you were just cast out as a victim. So I chose not to report this. And instead I got really pissed off and I started a nonprofit that taught women how to write code so that I could get more women into the tech space. So I took over running a nonprofit called Girl Develop It that teaches adult women how to write code from zero. And so my goal being, one, I specifically want to call out, it was adult women because it was at the time, there were lots of programs for girls in STEM and like getting more young women, like young children, like elementary school age to like learn how to write code. But there was not a whole lot of service to how do we get adult women immediately into this pipeline. And so I ran that organization for 5 years. I was able to make a lot of positive change by getting women either in tech or tech adjacent jobs or improve their current job opportunities by teaching them additional skills that made their work opportunities better. So that was my sort of pain into purpose story.
Yes, thank you, Becky. And even though I had insight to the story, couldn't stop, I think, my facial reaction during it. And the good theme, of course, from what each one of you shared was there was more than one spot of places of accelerating action. And certainly there's a lot of support for each one of what you shared in the chat. So thank you again for kicking us off with some personal stories and the impact that they had on each of you and what you observed around you. Thinking about upskilling and inclusion in what's becoming an ever-increasing digital world, I will share a stat for us just to tee up some context for what we'll talk about next. According to Forbes, more than half of women in tech leave the industry by the midpoint of their careers. And perhaps if they had experiences like yours, Becky, that could describe some of that stat, more than double the rate for men. While we might assume this is due to caring responsibilities, the main reasons include weak management support, lack of opportunity, and insufficient work-life balance. So asking each of you, what strategies can organizations, especially in what may be traditionally male-dominated industries such as tech, use to close our talent gaps and drive inclusion for more women, particularly those in leadership roles? And what are some successful approaches that you have seen or experienced? And we'll keep the mic with you, Becky, to start us off.
Sure. So it has to start with, honestly, like, especially in male-dominated fields, like, men need to be advocates, men need to make space, men need to make room at the table for the upcoming women leaders that need a voice. That story I just shared, like, would that have happened if the team I was on was 50% female and 50% male and not 99% male? Probably not, And so that representation matters, and making sure that there is space for women's voices and people of color to be heard. I think the other thing I'll say that's a strategy that has worked really well for me as an employer and a leader is we've taken some very unorthodox approaches, sort of unorthodox approaches to how we think about our leadership within my organization. So, for example, I've got two really powerful women on my leadership team within our company, and both of them are part-time. And that may be weird to some people. One of them is part-time because she wanted a different work-life structure, and the other one is part-time because she has a special needs child at home and she can't work full-time. And creating those types of spaces and opportunities has been really important for me and for my organization, because just because their working hours are slightly different does not change the amount of value that they add to the company, and that does not at all impact the vision and the loyalty and the dedication and the brilliance that they bring to the table. And so thinking about things in a slightly different way and really leaning into flexibility and autonomy and seeing people for the value and the worth that they bring, regardless of when they're there and when they're not, like, that's I think been a really important way that I've helped kind of bring kind of shift that sort of male dominated tech industry vibe.
Yes, and you're speaking to kind of taking different approaches or shifting a bit of what might be considered standard in an approach so that it presents a more inclusive opportunity. So thank you, Becky. And Dr. C, I know given your background and experiences in spaces you've been in, you have some thoughts on this too.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm going to piggyback on what Becky mentioned. I think it's being intentional about inviting women into circles and groups where there's scarcity. You think about even policy development in companies. If you're going to have certain policies or happy hours, for example, think about the mothers, the individuals who may not be able to work late or after hours, and ask those individuals for a different perspective on when might be a better time to have certain events. So I think it's about inviting women into the conversation, and it's also about inviting, just a diversity of perspective that can foster additional conversation around decision making, and then focusing on closing the gaps. Like, if in companies where I've worked, we've been very intentional about closing the gaps, particularly in spaces like IT, where typically with research there is less representation of women, and so I worked for a company that had a very targeted close the gap effort to promote, and when I mean promote, I mean advertise and market in spaces where women in tech would be kind of the targeted group. But closing the gap by being intentional about how you advertise, how you promote and market certain events, promotions, opportunities for women to feel included and feel accepted into those spaces.
Thank you. I know you might also have some examples too of where that has resonated for you, or where you felt like included based on what was shared in those space, if you might add that from a personal standpoint, Dr. C.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the last part of the question again?
Sure. If you had like a specific example that really resonated with you, that like drew you in so that you felt kind of included in those spaces as well.
Yeah, I've had a ton, because I think I've mentioned before, I've worked in technology, from an HR capacity in technology companies for more than 25 years or more. I think most recently, with the digital transformation work that I've been involved in, I've had to provide a level of perspective and strategy around how do we get people to move and evolve from this digital world in a different way. And so I've been invited to lead our conversations around career mobility, even in spaces where I am, the more junior person in the conversations. So I think part of this is education and awareness of the inclusivity and the importance of that. Is a significant part of what I think what has allowed me to be successful in this.
Which is a perfect transition to our next topic of change and transformation. Two words that have broad meaning. It's also where I'll share with all of you in our prep, we all probably had the most energy around. So topics that are near and dear to all of us here today. And again, just sharing a little bit of context. According to the latest McKinsey Women in the Workplace report, at our current pace, it could take almost 50 years, as I mentioned at the beginning, to receive gender parity in corporate America. And that staggering figure highlights the urgency for change. And starting with accelerating action, we'll spend some time now talking about, considering the fast-paced digital world, how can we build workspaces that truly empower women and promote gender equity? And I'll ask each one of our panelists if they could share some personal examples from their own experiences, because I'm sure there will be tips that each one of us take away from it. And I'll keep the mic with you, Dr. C.
Yeah, so I'm going to jump right into, I talked about the education and awareness and the significance of that inclusivity and having different voices. But leadership development training kind of comes to mind for me, because one of the things that, my company has been intentional about is providing more education and awareness around opportunity talent, but also around microaggressions and things that we can do differently as leaders, or be mindful of as leaders when we're leading diverse teams. And so, if you think about some of the terminology that we often hear in the workplace, things like, you're being too emotional, or someone who is vocal is too bold or too aggressive. But reframing that mindset within our leadership, language, and training our leaders on the appropriate way to engage people that are different and diverse groups of talent. So that leadership development space is a huge opportunity to help level set expectations and change the narrative about women in the workplace.
Thank you. And Danielle, knowing your day-to-day looks at broad organizational change and transformation, I would love to hear what you would share as your experience too.
I think one of the first thoughts I'm having just around creating, workspaces to empower women is to really understand what empowerment looks like for us, for different people. I think just like change and transformation is a sweeping term, I think empowerment can also be a broad term. So what does it mean for individuals to feel empowered? What does it mean? What type of opportunities do people want? And then creating workspaces to support that. I think we sometimes have just this generic metric against which we weigh everyone. And then some people don't live up to that and others do, but we're not necessarily meeting people where they are in terms of how they want to feel empowered, how they want to contribute. So I think that's part of it. And I think also, one of the things that we do within CAL, which I love, is our network of women. We have about 50% of our workforce is women, and a large number of our leadership team is women as well. And so that network gives us an opportunity to be exposed to those senior leaders, to see how we can grow within the organization because we see those things represented. And I also think that part of it is giving women the education and the skills so they feel empowered to build basic themselves. And if you don't see a way to do that in your immediate circle, then you can align yourself with organizations who are driving that. And I learned about one. I was glad this was coming up because I get to speak on this organization I just learned about, which is very cool, which is Wake International, the Women's Alliance for Knowledge Exchange. And their mission is to empower women's rights and social impact organizations through technology and volunteerism and mentoring. And they do this within the US and they also do it globally. So last month they were in Cambodia doing technology training for young female leaders, supporting a nonprofit there. They're preparing to go to Ukraine. This fall they'll be in Rwanda, they're in California. So it is such an amazing organization and group of women, and they're helping to develop the skills that will help women advance, and they're creating global networks that create space for empowered women to empower women, and I think that's so important.
I love that connection you made to empowering and that organization, and speaking to designing for you in mind versus what you're like. The broad term of empowerment can mean many things and require probably different ways for us to change within the organization and for groups and individuals. And Becky, what are your thoughts on that topic?
Yeah, so this one's interesting for me because one big difference between my organization and Dr. C and Danielle's is that I'm with a much smaller organization, right? Like Delta and Cal are big international organizations, whereas my organization is a small privately held agency, and so changing that workplace culture is a little bit different, right? Because my resources are I have a little bit more control, right? Like I have a little bit more opportunity, but I also don't have to worry about the same level of scale. So even, the company's been around for 16 years and I was the 6th or 7th employee, I think. And at the time that I started, like we never had a woman on staff that had gone on maternity leave. And one of the women that I had hired ended up having to go on maternity leave within the first few years of her employment, and we had to do things like create the maternity leave policies, make sure she had lactation rooms, like make sure we had the right setup in those, and could give her a safe and comfortable environment to come back to when she did return to work, and those kinds of things. So like there's the basic level of blocking and tackling that like the big companies have in droves, right? But like the small companies still need to make sure that we're addressing those issues as well. And then the other thing I'll say is sort of taking a way to empower women in the workplace is, in some ways, Danielle and Dr. C have both alluded, like happening outside of the workplace. So opportunities like training, or opportunities like different let's call it resource groups or community organizations that are geared towards women or towards leadership development, that kind of thing. I found a lot of value in those. So I mentioned like one nonprofit that I used to work with that taught women how to code. And I founded another nonprofit that would work with startup accelerators and tech conferences and go into those spaces and teach those, like oversee how to make those types of spaces more inclusive. And then I've been a part of personally, like when I took on the CEO position, for example, I was like, I absolutely need to be surrounded by other women leaders. Like, and so I joined a membership-based organization that was specifically designed for females in executive positions. And it was because I needed to not feel alone. Like I needed to have a peer network that understood my challenges and were able to like tell me their own stories and help me out. And that made me better in the workplace, right? And so that's something that I would very much encourage other people to do. I mean, like one of those groups that I was in recently is Katie actually was in with me, is called Leadership Cincinnati, and that's another group where it's like a group of executives where we're just sharing, where it's an idea exchange, and it's a group of peers that just help you learn how to lead and be better in the workplace by hearing other people's stories and how other places are doing and dealing with the challenges that you might be dealing with.
It's a great point of there's a lot of resources that are outside of our workplaces too that can have influence to what we might bring in as ideas or otherwise, and certainly expand our networks, in which I'm very grateful that those two things collided for us, Becky. Before we spend some time looking through to see if we have any questions in the chat, I did want to ask each one of our panelists, like, as a piece of final advice or call to action for this group that's gathered. And again, I think we have a wide range of people joining us today, so I'm sure some of the small business experiences resonate with others too. But like, offer for today's attendees, like, eager to accelerate action and drive lasting change, however you might be defining that in your own mind for today, but either for themselves or those who they lead. Let's just share a couple additional thoughts. And Danielle, I'm coming back to you.
Okay. So I think there's driving change and there's accelerating change and making change stick, right? We say that's by change person, right? So can we reach the goal by ourselves? Of course we can, because women are awesome and sure we can do it. But I think if we want to accelerate action, and forward movement, we know that we have to do that as a community, and it can't just be the community of just sitting around and preaching to each other, right, and trying to drive things forward. I think it's really important for us to reach beyond ourselves. We know there are men who are great advocates and allies for women's equity, and making sure we engage them. When I think about my mentors, I have a couple of mentors who are more tenured in their careers. One of them is retired. I have a couple who are much more junior than I am, younger than me. I learned so much from them. So I think we really think about accelerating change and action. That we really have to, look left, right, up, down, and find your people who are going to work with you to build that path forward. I think if we're going to get there, whatever there is, if we're going to get there and get there in an accelerated way, we're going to have to do it together.
I love that, Danielle. And speaking to a constellation of people who can be in our orbit to help us. Becky, what are some of the final piece of advice or call to action you'd offer?
Yeah, so you said in your opening, you read a quote, don't wait for someone to speak for you. And what I was going to say here is similar to that. Like, I got to where I am because I'm always the person in the room that will say the thing that everybody's thinking, but nobody's brave enough to say. And so I think what I would tell people is you have to speak up and you have to speak out and you have to demand change. Like, you have to demand the change in order for the change to happen. I got to give a talk the other day, and I led with this quote from there's a computer scientist and Navy admiral who is very admirable, named Grace Hopper, and she this was decades ago. She was a pioneer in the computer science field, and she said, she has this famous quote that says, the most dangerous phrase in the language is we've always done it this way. And at the end of the day, the way it's always been done has not worked for a lot of us. And so you have to be willing to your point, like, not wait for someone to speak up for you. Like, you have to do the speaking up in a way that works for you, but you have to demand the change.
Yeah, that's helpful, Becky. And what comes to mind for me is thinking about, like, being curious about what has always been done, right? Like, there might be an innovative way or ideas that hadn't been thought of before, right? And so it's a great reminder of things that we probably say in our daily lives that consider differently. And Dr. C, how about you?
So I think for me, I talked about early in my career where my confidence was really challenged by feeling overlooked and undervalued as a woman in leadership in a male dominant world. And so I have worked my entire life trying to be the most educated, the most qualified to never feel that again. And I have, fortunately enough, to be in a place in my life and my career where being a confident woman in business and leadership is a gift. It's not a flaw. And so I am encouraging any and all attendees on this session today to wear their confidence with as a strength and a badge of honor, to be bold and brave in the decisions that you make and stand on what you believe. If you've earned your place at the table, take it. You don't have to prove that you belong there.
Love it. Love it. Quickly, what started playing in my head was Unstoppable, the song by Sia. So just sharing that, that resonated with me. At this point, I'm going to turn it back over to Sarah, and I'll help guide the flow for the discussion, but would love to pause to see if we have any questions from our attendees today.
We do. We have several, so we'll try to get through as many as possible. Some of these came through anonymous, so we'll start with this one. How do you push the needle to be a more diverse and equitable company when there's a lot of pushback on DEIB in the political scene right now?
Dr. C, would you like to go ahead?
I can jump in. So I obviously, this whole, conversation around diversity, equity, inclusion is very sensitive and all of that. One of the things that I'm most proud of is working for a company who stands on the ground of inclusivity and equity matters. And one of the things that, I'm proud to say is that we are creating a culture of inclusivity for all people. And so we are not backing down from that. We will continue to foster programs and initiatives to close the gap on, whether that's gender gaps, whether that's racial divide gaps, disability gaps, whatever those gaps are. So I think it's important to have to operate in a company or within parameters that you're going to stand for something and stick to it. And I think that's what we're doing in our company.
Thank you for sharing that. And I can't help but note the pride in your voice with that. So thank you.
From Laura, we would love to hear the panelists share their thoughts regarding how conditioned beliefs that women are less valued than men contribute to the slow progress toward equity, and ideas for how to shift that belief. Any thoughts on that?
As we're maybe thinking, I'll just share the other morning. I have a daughter who's 10. No, excuse me. She just turned 11. Don't tell her I forgot. She just was getting ready and she turned to me and she said, you know how some people say that men are better than women? And I stopped her and I was like, give me names. Who's saying that men are better than women? And that is nothing against men, but it was an automatic assumption that was something that was a held belief. And I think going back to like the sentiment of the way things always have been done, there are beliefs that are upheld as part of cultural norms or otherwise, or part of workplaces that there's just an opportunity to pause on. I share that just partly for fun, but very real, right? Like very real conversations that happen certainly in many places. But Becky, I see you came off mute if you wanted to share.
Yeah, sure. First of all, also give me the names so that I can go to bat for your daughter. Great. I'll tell you from my perspective, like the proof is in the data. Like look at the data. You know what I mean? Like from my own personal experience, like I took over running my company about 2.5 years ago, and like the numbers speak for themselves. Like the work and the progress that we've made speaks for itself. And so prove to me, like anybody that's saying that, I will push back and say, prove to me that women are less than, because it's not true. And it's statistically significantly not true. And so I just think, how do you shift that mindset? I think it's a seeing is believing. And this is why you have to make space and seats at the table for women, and you have to give them a voice, and you have to let them lead, because they will take you far. And not believing in that is just silly. Like, show me where it's wrong, because it's 100% of the time going to be right. Not everybody's amazing, right? Like, we're all human, we're all fallible, but like the data doesn't back that belief.
Thank you for
Thanks,
sharing.
Becky.
So I love this one. What advice would you give to your younger self?
Danielle?
Yeah. I think, one of the first, I also love quotes. And so one of my favorites is, there is nothing enlightened about shrinking so other people won't feel insecure around you. And I would want my younger self to know that, to stop shrinking. And, I think as Dr. C said earlier, like, to use your voice, and that it matters. And so I think, I would absolutely tell my younger self that, like, no shrinking, it serves no one.
Love that. Great quote.
This one is from Lindy, specifically directed for Dr. C. How can I, talent development professional, drive the ideas of change, empowerment, and a culture of learning in a fast-moving, male-dominated organization?
Yeah, that's a good one. But I will say, my success has been meeting people where they are. And so when I enter a conversation, whether it's with one of our executives or someone in the tech space, I try to bring a personal element and vulnerability into that conversation, so that they understand that I understand them, and that I know I hear them, I understand them, so they will reciprocate that. They will see me and they will hear me. And so I think, understanding the business, understanding that business need, understanding that leaders need and their desires. Then when you create your talent strategy, it feels connected. It's that WIFM, right? They're feeling connected to something because you've added value to where there is a gap, whatever that looks like. So I think it's important to build up that connectedness with the leadership team, with your executives, so that you hear them, they hear you, and that there's trust and buy-in to wherever your talent strategy is trying to go.
For sharing that. I'm gonna try to get two more quick ones in. This one builds on that from Jennifer. How would you suggest positioning yourself as a mature woman re-entering the workforce that has many younger employees in your role? And congrats for the role.
I want to answer this one, and I can't say that I've really experienced that yet, but I want to answer from a different perspective. So I am finding myself in this particular phase of my career as a very senior, seasoned individual, right? So there's a lot of younger talent coming into the workplace. And so one of the things that I had to do is embrace that I am now the more seasoned person, and an aging, I'm one of the aging people in the workforce. And I have learned the most from my daughter. And I think one of the things that, one of the questions that I didn't answer, which was my greatest accomplishment or achievement, is building two incredible daughters. And my daughters, one is 1% of Black engineers graduated from Georgia Tech. And when I tell you, she brings a perspective to me all the time about the workplace that I don't think about. And so rather than looking at the younger generation as potentially replacing me. I learn and listen from my, from that generation, because there's things and lessons that they're teaching me, and particularly about being bold and confident, that I did not have myself. My daughter just went to her company after a year and asked for a 30% increase. And when she told me she was going to do that, I immediately wanted to say, don't do that. And then I had to catch myself. And I'm like, you do what you feel that you need to do and what you feel you're valued at. So I'm answering that to say, sometimes it's about learning and from the younger generation, to see what we can learn from them while we're helping to guide and mentor, maybe motivate them as well.
That's a perfect segue to this last question of how might we engage men and non-women to attend women ERG events. And Danielle, I see that you had an add to maybe to the last one.
Oh,
Oh,
no,
no.
just co-signing what Dr. C said. Like,
Pledging support. Yeah.
oh, that's the problem. I accidentally clicked to raise my hand. Sorry.
Oh, no worries.
But since I'm off mute on the question of the ERG,
Yeah.
have our Cal Now network of women ERG, and which puts a lot of effort into making sure everyone across the organization feels included in our messaging and our events. And I know that group, our leaders of that ERG, especially, we have open houses for all of our ERGs. We just had one recently just to inform people of those groups. And I think part of that is just to make sure people know that every group that we have several groups for our diverse employee population. And I'm very thankful, to echo Dr. C, that our organization has really doubled down on our commitment to equity and inclusion and creating these groups. And I think it's just showing that openness for everyone to attend, and also making sure it's relevant to them. There's a woman in everyone's life, right? As we're talking about different topics, it's not just for women to sit and listen to what matters for them, but for everyone to learn more about their community, about the people they love in their lives or care for their lives, about the things that matter to them. And so I think it's just opening and making it relevant in different ways to different audiences.
Thank you. Katie, I think you have a few words to wrap us up, and then we have a couple of announcements at the end.
Yes, I'm happy to. And again, a huge thank you. I hope you'll all join me to say it was time well spent with our incredible panelists for sharing their wisdom, and to all of you for being a part of this conversation. Your voices, stories, and support make a difference. And one of the biggest ways to help accelerate action is to support the supporters. So Danielle mentioned Wake International. I know there are many other impactful groups across the world delivering critical work that assists women and girls, and we can all lend our support and solidarity, local community, global scale, your choice. But let's carry today's inspiration forward, lifting each other up, driving change, and continuing to celebrate women every day. And so I wish you all a very happy International Women's Day on Saturday. And the symbol for this year that goes along with Accelerate Action, and I asked our panelists to join me, is one of strength. So let's flex, we're confident, and thank you all so much again. It's been a pleasure to be with you all today.
Thank you so much. So to wrap up today's session, again, echoing the gratitude, if there is someone else that you would like to recognize and lift their voice, every year we do an awards program. This year we are focusing on inclusive transformation. So we'll be recognizing individuals who drive meaningful change within their organizations and industries by removing barriers, fostering inclusion, and creating transformative opportunities for people to feel respected, valued, and safe for who they are. So whether it's recognizing yourself or a leader whose work you admire, we encourage you to nominate them for this year's awards. The awards are open for submission till the end of the month, or March 28th. And you can find all the details here, or Katie Coburn is going to drop the link in the chat. Also, I do want to call out Katie, who has Coburn, who's been behind the scenes producing today's session. So thank you, Katie, for that. In addition, each year we present the awards at our conference. Previously Exlearn, it's now the Explain conference. It'll be late August. All of the information for registering, again, Katie will drop that in the chat as well, is here, along with a promo code for a discount on registration. Again, we are looking to build community with all of the amazing leaders that we get to work with and you who have joined us here today. So we invite you to attend. With that, I just want to thank you for being here today. If there's anything, any action that we can help you accelerate, please reach out to us at hello@tier1performance.com. With that, this concludes this year's celebration for International Women's Day.